Hello. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Wallace. Welcome back, 12th House listeners, to another episode. We are starting a new series with this episode. We love a series.
We do. That's the way we like to think. We like to let an idea brew for a while.
We love containers. We love buckets. It helps the brain.
Love bucket hats. They also help the brain.
This is true. Protection. We are very excited to intro today's episode, and we'll keep it short because we had a really great conversation with Liz Tran. If you don't know Liz, you may have heard of Reset, the podcast, or Reset, the previous location that Liz had in Manhattan. And she's a wonderful executive coach as well as an author, an incredible podcaster, entrepreneur, really a multi-hyphenate in all the senses.
I mean, I love everyone we talk to on the podcast, but there are some conversations that just really stick to you, like oatmeal sticks to your ribs, for a long period of time and feel sustaining. And this conversation with Liz was that for me, and with you, Wallace. Like the vibes were just correct. And if you are someone who's doubting yourself right now, who's like, did I make a horrible mistake going out on my own, doing this thing, or having this dream? Like, it doesn't feel like everything's really hard and not going the right way. Am I going to just dissolve into abject failure and disappear from the face of the planet? Listen to this episode, because Liz, obviously, she's so illustrious and talented, as well as is described, but she's really gone through some stuff over the last couple of years and doubted herself. And the way that she talks about that and her journey with Reset NYC, her physical location that she opened up right before COVID and then had to shut down, is so relatable. And I just really appreciate her candor, because I don't think that we hear often about what feel like failures in business from people when they're standing in the light of their success. Like, we don't hear about their shadowy moments that got them there. And Liz is so transparent about it and the timeline. And I just really appreciate that. Just this conversation really inspired me to be like, it's okay. It's okay that not everything works out. Like, it is working out.
Yeah. If you're interested in hearing about starting over, maintaining a beginner's mind, and carrying on, this episode is going to be wonderful for you.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's get into this episode with Liz Tran.
Liz, welcome to the 12th House. We're so happy to have you here. This month on the podcast, we are talking about doing things differently. And that is a very big umbrella to talk about doing things differently. But we have so many points of interest in relation to your story and doing things differently. So we're really excited to have you here.
I love this topic. I have 4 prominent placements in Aquarius: my sun, my Mercury, my rising, and my Jupiter. So I'm all about doing things differently.
Love that. Wallace is an Aquarius sun, and I'm a Mercury Aquarius. So what a vibe we are. We see each other.
Yeah. How does that show up for you? How do those placements show up? Is it something that you're aware of now, where you look back on your life and you're like, wait a second, that makes sense? Or are you noticing it more now as you're kind of evolving your relationship to it?
I love that question, because, when you meet people who don't believe in astrology and they're like, oh, well, I'm the same sign as this person. Why are we not anything alike? Or, I have a twin brother or twin sister. And I think my relationship to doing things differently is really about the expression of my birth chart. So when I was younger, before I discovered the spiritual path, I think the way it expressed itself is I always felt like an outsider, but I so desperately really wanted to fit in. And so I think I changed a lot about who I was. Like, I remember lying to my friends about things because I wanted to I wanted to belong and fit in. I grew up in Virginia, in the suburbs. And then as I started getting into Buddhism and learning more about myself and building confidence, the expression became that I didn't really care about fitting in anymore. In fact, it was a point of pride to do things a little bit differently. And so in every sort of juncture of my career, I've never been like, I've never wanted to be lumped into other people doing that thing. So when I worked in venture capital, I was like, yeah, but I'm different, right? Like, I have a soul. And then now as an executive coach, I'm like, yeah, I'm different, right? Or, astrology, whatever it might be. So I tried really hard to kind of move away from my past where I was really trying to fit into a certain type of person to now where I would rather just people get to know me really deeply and then figure that out for themselves.
Liz, do you follow the Enneagram at all?
I do. Yes.
Do you know what your number is? I have a guess, but I would love to know if you know.
I'm a 7.
Oh, okay.
That was going to be my guess. I'm a 7 also. I was like, I get 7 vibes.
Michelle, what are you? Are you 3?
No, I'm a 4. And I totally thought you were a 4 because you said like, I want to do things differently. Like I wanted Forrest Love to be special. We like to do things differently. So I tuned into that, but it also totally makes sense that you're a 7.
I thought I was a 2 for a really long time. And I think that just goes to kind of societal programming. It's like, we're meant to be caring and supportive of other people. And I think that's a component of how I am, but I think I'm a 7 with a 6 wing.
On that note of feeling like maybe you're a 2 because you're so good at supporting people and listening to them, I think it's really interesting that as both a VC and a coach, that often is like your role. I mean, being an investor, of course, is vetting projects, obviously, but a lot of it, I would imagine, is talking founders down off the ledge, and being there to support them and guide them. What was can you tell us a little bit about that part of your life?
Yeah, definitely. I actually did that for nearly 100% of my job. I'd probably say 80% because I was hired in to build a team that would essentially support founders from a perspective of everything related to people and talent. So giving them advice, building playbooks, helping them sort of understand how to navigate really fast growth. And I kind of fell into venture capital through a really circuitous path. And it's funny because I've always been a really quote unquote ambitious person. I've always really wanted lots of things because I grew up in an environment where I didn't really have that. And I was like, I'm going to make a lot of money because we never had money. I'm going to do all these things. But every time I made a plan, it just never worked. I was like, I'm going to become a lawyer. And then I didn't get into any law schools. It was stuff like that where I was very determined, but it never worked out. And as soon as I let go of my really tight grip on the wheel a little bit, things started to open up. So when I was 27 or 28, I did a trip to travel, backpack, and take a sabbatical around the world with my then husband, now ex-husband. And during that time, a lot of my friends were like, whoa, you just got promoted. I worked at tech companies and they're like, what? Why would you go do this? And I was like, oh, it's time to do it now. And my ex-boss called me, the person whose job I quit to do this. And she said, hey, we're opening up an office in Japan. And since you're just chilling in Japan, do you want to help us hire all the people, figure out how to pay people, et cetera? So I said yes to that. I helped them hire people for their Brazil office. And then when I came back to the States, I realized I had kind of inadvertently built a little bit of a consulting practice to help tech companies get to the next level without having the people who knew what to do. And so I was their go-to person. I'd come in for anywhere between 6 weeks to 6 months and help companies with different projects. And then one of my clients said, hey, would you be interested in talking to my investor? They're looking for someone like you. And I remember I got the email about this when I was at the airport about to go spend a month in Bali to do a long silent meditation and yoga and also kind of just fuck around. And I was like, and at the end of the trip, I was sort of like, maybe I could just stay in Bali and teach yoga and do that. And I was like, or I could go home and interview for this job. And I was really an unlikely candidate for this job, but I think they really connected with my passion for helping founders. And that's kind of the thing that I think presents itself in Aquarius is I like being recognized for the work I do, but the direct spotlight really makes me feel uncomfortable. And so I always joke around that I hope that my work impacts a lot of people, but that no one ever knows what I look like.
Yeah, I can relate.
That is very relatable.
Deep relate.
Yeah. I never post stuff of myself on my Instagram account. I mean, I feel like I've been following holisticism for so long and so nice to see what you two look like because I've been such a huge fan. So I feel that energy from you too, where it's about, giving wisdom to other people. And so, it really fit in with my job in VC where I was like, okay, if I can just get behind these people, and I do the same thing as a coach and I think of the same thing as a writer now as well, where every time I sit down and write, I have a little bit of a prayer that I say. It's like a work prayer. And it is, may my lessons and hardships be of service to others. May I grow in love and abundance every day and inspire others to do the same. And may my energy and my support enable people to reach their greatest potential. And so I really think about that, because otherwise I get really shy about putting things out into the world, because I really don't want to feel like I have the spotlight, but then it helps center me. I'm like, okay, this is why I'm doing the work that I do.
Yeah.
I love that. I just got little goosebumps. That's such a beautiful
ritual. Like it takes the ego out of the work in a really healthy way.
Yeah. That's the hope, right? Because it's hard. It's really, the ego is just such a sneaky thing. You're always like, oh, I've mastered it. And then you're like, no, I haven't.
Yeah. It's really hard to hear your intuition when because your ego can just be so loud and attractive, like saying great things that, sexy, that they're like, this is interesting. Turn that up. I love that. And your intuition sometimes can, I don't know, at least for me, I'll speak from the eye, stuff that's like really scary. Where I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. Like that sounds horrible, or that's the opposite of what I've been doing or what I've been working towards. But what choice do you have other than to listen to it? You have to listen to it eventually.
Yeah, it's very true. I had a moment like that at the end of kind of this period of time I had to be able to turn in my book to my publishers. And I had 6 weeks left, and I really hadn't written, I wasn't close, right? Like I'd written about half of the book, but it felt like I was like stopping, starting. And one of my friends said, hey, let's go to my place in California and we'll go to the desert, and then we'll be with other writers and we'll just all write together because we're all kind of on the same deadline. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was either my intuition or my ego. I wasn't sure, but one of them was saying, you got to just start from scratch and throw out all this writing and start with a new fundamental premise to your book, because what you're doing really isn't working. And that's why you're having such a hard time, because I was putting the hours in, but it was like I came out with like 500 words that sucked, and I couldn't figure out how to get to it. And what that voice said is, this book is not about spiritual entrepreneurship as you thought it was going to be, but it's actually about connecting to intuition and about the higher self and how that is the ultimate guidance. And I was like, all right, this sounds good. And so I stayed up until 4 a.m. kind of sketching out what the new book could look like. And then when the next morning we were all having breakfast, and I was like, okay, I have this idea. I think I'm going to change my book. And I was like, I can't tell if I'm totally insane right now or if this is a good idea. And I had to ask myself, okay, is this the ego or is this intuition? And I had a little bit of a checklist where it's like, okay, if it's ego, it'll be a little fear-based. And if it's intuition, it'll be believe that I can. So I was like, okay, probably intuition because this is a hard thing. And I was like, ego will be about appearances and the way I appear to others. Intuition will be what's really in my heart. And the ego part actually was objecting to this. And it was saying, well, you already sold this idea to your publisher. What if they get mad at you? So I was like, okay, so it's probably not ego. And so I sort of ran through a list. And so I wound up actually writing this book that is all about listening to your intuition and how to actually hear it and identify it and be able to tell what it is. Maybe it could be your triggering, right? Or it could be your emotional voice. It could be your ego. And, there's more to it than that. But the fundamental premise is that we all can be guided by something that is not society, our bosses, role models. We know what's best for us within. And I wrote the entire book. I think I kept 2 chapters from the previous version. I wrote the whole book in 6 weeks. I turned it in. My editor wrote me back and she said, this is one of the best drafts I've read from a first-time author before. I was like, okay, big relief, because I didn't actually know if it was totally insane or not. And after that, I feel like that was the biggest lesson for me, that I need to listen to my intuition. But what about you? Are there any examples that come up for either of you about a moment where your intuition guided you in a way that seemed really unexpected? Or maybe it didn't make sense?
I was about to follow up with a question. I was like, ooh, you turned it back.
We did a reverse on it. I love that.
Yeah. You asked the question.
If intuition said, hey, do this, even though it didn't really make as much logical sense, but at the end of the day, it wound up being the right thing.
I really related to what you said earlier about essentially your best laid plans kind of all usually falling to the wayside. I feel often when I'm laying out a plan that is very, I guess, right-brained, and I have a very specific idea of how it's going to go, that's usually when my intuition comes in and is like, actually, it's going to happen this way. And I think even moving to LA and California when I did with zero plan as a Canadian to figure out how I was going to find a job, what I was going to do, I look back on it being like only a young, kind of naive, very hopeful version of me could have done that. But I was 1000% guided on an intuitive path the entire time. And I did very random things that I couldn't explain based on going to a women's circle because someone invited me that I didn't know anyone at, and the woman there happened to be the person who hired me for my first job. Things like that, where looking back on it now, you can connect the dots and only see, oh, that was my intuition leading me there. There was no logic in that whatsoever.
Because, I mean, we actually can't really picture what is best for us because we're dealing with only what we've experienced in the past. We have a limited data set that is actually fairly unimaginative, right? It's actually pretty limited. And the full scope, you know, if you're like, how do I make it in California as a Canadian? No one would be like, go to a women's circle, right? But
yeah.
Yeah. Go to a drum circle. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I tell you guys something really embarrassing?
Yes.
So last night I reactivated, I logged on to Tumblr, which I haven't done in literally 10 years. And I found my old Tumblr. I didn't even honestly remember making it, if I'm going to be candid with you. And I found all these posts that I'd written that I don't have any followers. It was just kind of like this public journal that no one else was reading. And from 10 years ago. And Liz, I was a professional dancer in New York, and then I moved to LA and I ended up getting into tech, and, you know, now we're here. But, one of the posts that I had written, it was like, my heart broke for like the 22-year-old version of me. I was talking about how, you know, I wanted to dance at this company so badly, and I was an apprentice there, and it was every fifth thought was just like becoming a dancer with these people. This is the thing I've wanted the longest in my entire life. You know, I've held this dream for so long in my short life, and then not getting it, you know, not actually ending up fulfilling that apprenticeship and getting asked to be in the company, and just being heartbroken and kind of asking the world or myself, like, why is it that when I want things the most, I don't get them? And when I try the hardest, like things don't happen for me. And it's like, oh, sweet baby, sweet little pony. Like it's going to be okay. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of it. Like when you really are pushing and forcing and thrusting, like doesn't always work, you know? And when you start listening and like following the breadcrumbs or the winks from the universe, life can be so much more easeful and so much more fun and way more interesting than like you said, Liz, than you could ever have imagined, because your data set of what you know is so limited and small. And I just was like, oh, what a poor baby. But also like, your life is awesome. How cool is this that I'm doing what I'm doing right now? Reading this 10 years later, like it all worked out.
Michelle, I really love that story. And I don't know if you know this, but something similar happened to Vera Wang, where she really was on track to be like a Olympic ice skater, and she didn't make it. And she was so devastated. She'd been training her whole life for this. And then she went and she worked at magazines. She was at Vogue, and she was like, I'm going to become editor in chief. This is my moment. And she got passed up for a promotion, and she realized it was never going to happen for her. And then she started her own line at age 40. And now she's obviously just so iconic and has changed so much in the industry. And I love that story for you because it's so inspiring, because I love what you're doing now. Like, how could you ever predict that in the future? It's not a job that's on, you know, a school choice, you know, like when you're younger and people say, what are you going to be when you grow up? Like, I didn't actually even know that executive coaching existed until I was 31 or 32. And
wow.
I heard it, I thought, oh yeah, I want that job. But I didn't even know that you could really do that.
Well, and you were kind of already doing it with like what you
exactly.
kind of like already created the job description, just hadn't added a title to it.
Yes, that's true. Right. And like not having as much like imagination to know how to put it into life until I saw other people doing it.
Yeah, I'm so curious about the points along that journey now, reflecting back and thinking about your intuition. What was leading you there when you were like, this is not the path I want to continue down?
I kind of always knew that I would leave eventually. Being a 7, an Enneagram 7, I had never stayed in a job for longer than 2 years. And the thought of committing to something long-term was really frightening. And it was actually one of the reasons why I took the job is they said, hey, if you take this job, you're going to have to be here for at least 3 or 4 years because you're going to develop deep relationships with the founders in our portfolio. And I was just learning about the Enneagram then. I was reading all these books about it, and it said that one of the growth areas for the 7 is to stay a minute longer, a day longer, a month longer, a year longer than you feel comfortable. And that is the edge by which you'll learn everything that you need to know. And so I thought, okay, maybe having a forcing function here will be good. And so I always kind of knew, but I was actually really happy there for probably like 3 years. And I will never forget this because there were a series of eclipses that happened, and they were happening all in my 12th house. And this was which is like apt for the name of this podcast, in July of 2018. And
I knew you were going to say that year. I just had a feeling because that was a really intense eclipse season. It was. It just was. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was so intense. And I remember it was like July and we were going on a company retreat, and I thought, oh, I wonder how this is going to manifest for me. And before then I'd always thought, yeah, I'm going to leave at some point. I'm going to leave. And then after that eclipse, it was like, I got to go now. And I cried hysterically all weekend. I pretended I was sick so I wouldn't have to go to company bonding events. I had 2 roommates who were 2 of my best friends at the company. And I just said, I'm going to be out of here. Like, just watch, I'm going to quit. And it was funny because what pushed me over the edge were like kind of 2 little fluke things that were so out of character of that company. Cause generally it was like a really great place to work, but I think they came at the right moment to allow me to be really incensed and angry and to give me that energy to push myself over the edge. And so it was funny because I'd been thinking about it for a while, and then it became so clear in that moment. And the big thought was, I cannot do a job just because it's the safe, prestigious, financially lucrative thing to do. So remember, like, I grew up in, government subsidized housing. Like, we were so poor, like we didn't have money for anything. Like, I remember having to ask my mom for $5 to pay the field trip fee, and her being like, I don't really have it right now. And so this was a job where I was making so like more money than I ever thought. It was just so much financial security. And I just sort of knew through doing a lot of spiritual work that my reason for being on this planet was not to acquire financial stability as I thought it was, but rather to trust in myself and believe in myself and know that my stability came from that instead. And I said, this is a fork. This is the moment where I choose to be the kind of person who stays somewhere because it's easy, or I can choose to be the kind of person who does anything, even if it's hard, as long as it's aligned with their values. Like, I will bear any sort of pain. I will put up with any sort of struggle as long as like I know it's the right thing to do. And so I gave back like 30% of the equity that I had already vested there in the fund. And I gave it to the person who reported into me because she was taking up so much of my work. I took everything I had saved and over the past, 3 years there, and I put it into opening a business in New York. So basically remodeling the old man repeller space into like a learning studio in Nolita.
Whoa.
And so I went kind of fully into it. Yeah. And it was, I basically put like literally my whole career savings into like an actual renovation of the space, even though we were just renting it. I took out $100,000 loan through SoFi, like that startup bank, and really went for it. And the idea was to have a learning studio where people could come, and that would be both corporate clients as well as we'd offer classes for the integrated self, whether that was breath work, or it was career coaching in a group setting, manifestation classes, et cetera. And the space was a huge money suck, and it was basically a money pit. And I was keeping it alive through executive coaching and corporate workshops. to finance kind of the consumer facing classes. And 6 months in, I was like, oh shit, this is really crazy. I'm really in the hole. I got a crazy tax bill for like, I think it was like I had to pay like $40,000 on this tax bill because of some of the tax code changes from when I was at my previous job. And, and then, but the business started breaking even like month 6. So I was like, okay, this is good. We're like, there's a path here. There are more people coming to classes. People know about it. We had just gotten a bunch of good press, like in the New York Times, the New Yorker. And then 3 months later, COVID happened and I had to shut down the studio because I couldn't carry, $8,500 rent every month and plus the expenses for a place that wasn't even going to be able to offer in-person gatherings, which was how I was making money. And so I was totally devastated and I felt like I had taken this huge risk for nothing. And that was in that moment where I really doubted my spirituality because I had made all these decisions based on my integrity and my spiritual beliefs and my values. And they really hadn't worked out. And I was so upset. Like I remember just crying on the floor while my husband packed things into boxes because I just couldn't do it. And then I couldn't even say goodbye to all the things in the space. I mean, we had an 800-pound crystal that was this black smoky quartz in the space that I had gotten in Arizona and shipped all the way there to sort of give the space this beautiful feel. We had this giant, basically it was this huge door that was custom made that was on pivot hinges. So when you walked in, it felt like you're like stepping into a new zone. I had to leave the door there. I still want it back, but I don't really know how to get it back. And then, I lost 2.5 months rent because I had to break my lease. And so it was all these things. And I was like, okay, well now I'm 34. I've been working like crazy my whole career, so many days of working 12-hour days constantly for the past, 12 years. And I have actually nothing to show for it except almost $180,000 in debt, a lot of which was on high interest credit cards that are about to come due. And I was like, I don't really know what to do. This was in 2020. And so then I was basically recovering from, this big loss that I had and feeling like a complete failure. Yeah. But luckily through now another tax thing where because I had paid so much money in when I worked in venture capital, I actually got a bunch of money back. And then I started booking more executive coaching clients. It took probably another 6 to 8 months to feel like I had my footing underneath me again. And within a year and I want to say, a year and a half of closing the studio, I had a full roster of coaching clients. I had sold my book deal and was paid off all my debt and then was back on again. And then just a few months after that, I bought this beautiful house, in Connecticut where I split my time now between New York and there. It's on 22 acres and it's so bucolic and it was just all perfect. And during that time in the pandemic, I thought, okay, there's this quote and I think it's by Rumi, but it goes something like this. I'm going to totally botch this, but it's who's to say, when life has, I think it goes, when life has flipped upside down, who's to say that the side that is on is worse than the one that you wanted? And so I just kept saying that to myself over and over again. And it's probably, Michelle, how you felt when you didn't get that apprenticeship that you've been working your whole life for. And I thought, okay, maybe there's some good here. Maybe there's some good here. And I sat down every day and I was like, great. I am underemployed for the first time ever in my life. I'm going to start writing. And so I took these writing classes for free online. I read books about writing and I just would sit at this little card table with a tablecloth over it. And I would sit and look out the window and watch the birds in Canada where my husband's family is from. And I would just type and type and type. And I wrote all this really bad stuff that I never used later, but it taught me the muscle of writing. And I never would have ever had the free time to do that. And now I've discovered my deepest passion, which is actually communication through the written word. And it took a long time to be able to build that talent and skill. And so now it was all worth it. But honestly, for a good year of my life, I really thought it wasn't. I was just like, this is a horrible decision. I really regret my whole life. And even after that, I think it was it was in August after COVID happened. I told my husband, I was like, I think I'm going to give up. I don't think this is for me. I don't actually think that me following my dreams works. And he was like, give it 6 more months. Just try. You have enough money. You're making enough money to cover rent, and all the things you need. You're making enough money to cover half of our bills. So just keep doing that. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll just do it for 6 more months. And it was during that 6 months that everything took off.
That was an incredible story also. I was just enraptured.
I was also thinking about, the beginning of Reset and how I remember when you launched and I was just like, whoever is behind this is dialed, because the branding was so on point. It just was like, I was like, I'm jealous of this. This is so cool. And it's like interesting, I guess, for me to hear now that you were doubting yourself through that, like that it wasn't going the way that you thought, because it looked amazing from the outside. And I never would have imagined that turmoil was happening in your life. So thanks for sharing that with us, because that's very, like, I don't know, I think that gives a lot of people hope that it's going to be okay, right?
Definitely. I love the point that you made, because it was during this time when I was most stressed out is when I was getting the best press of my life and all these opportunities. It was when the business really wasn't going well. And now I think I'm able to really separate any sort of feelings of comparison, because you just never know what someone is going through. And even if someone seems like they're having a really hard time, they might be having a great time, and vice versa. And, similarly, like, I'm very public about this journey I've been on through doing IVF and trying to get pregnant for 4 years. And I think people are always like, oh, I feel so bad for you. And which is fair, I think a fair reaction, but it's actually a lot more nuanced than that, where it's been really beautiful in a lot of ways. And then, the flip side is I think people are like, oh, well, you did Reset and things must have been so amazing, blah, blah, blah. And not to see like how hard that was. I mean, it was during this time I hadn't smoked cigarettes like in so long. I mean, I grew up in Virginia, so I was always smoking in college. I started smoking again, which was crazy because I'm such a health nut. And so I'd just be out there on Mott Street, if you know New York, just downing bubble tea and like smoking cigarettes when I was supposed to be leading the spiritual organization. And I was so mean. And I would like come home and just like take baths and watch and just kind of marathon episodes of Jane the Virgin, because I just needed something that was happy and light in my life. But I was just eating like total shit. I stopped working out completely. And, the pandemic was a real like silver lining to be able to find myself again. And honestly, it was kind of nice for the pandemic to happen, because I think honestly that I would have had to close the studio eventually anyway, just because the financials didn't really work. But what a blessing to have the pandemic where everyone's lives were shifting and then not really have anyone question me. People are just like, okay, it's like another thing that the pandemic sucked up.
Yeah. That's a good way of thinking about, I mean, it's true. It's true. It was a nice, like, general reset, right? Where we could all kind of drop our judgments around what it meant to, like, quote unquote fail. Cause nothing's really a failure, right? Like, it's not. It's just one door opens the next. And so everyone had a new door that just opened at the same time, which was kind of sweet.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about how we need sometimes those forcing functions, like you said earlier, Liz, or kind of catastrophic events to be like, well, now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to become the person or the thing. And to see you also make those decisions when no one was forcing you, when you were deciding what was next, and be like, I'm going to launch this podcast. I'm going to launch my own business. I'm going to get into writing. When you were working through that, how did you overcome imposter feelings, or what did you really lean on during that time when you were starting so many new things at once?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I really tried to do things differently than when I first started the physical studio, because looking back, I think a lot of that decision came from ego. I did not take a break in between my venture capital job and starting Reset. In fact, I overlapped the two by, I think, 8 months, because when I quit my job, my employer asked me to actually stay for a year. And so originally I felt guilty. And so I was like, I'll stay for a year. And I wound up making it like 9 months. But at that point it was too much, because both were in full swing. And I wanted to do a physical space because I'd been working in this realm of just ideas. And when you work in VC, you're not really producing anything besides the occasional slide deck, and you're just supporting people who are actually doing the real work. And if I had maybe even just paused and not felt so much ego pressure to go do this big, bold thing, I could have easily just looked at my chart and know that I have like no earth placements. And the idea of like, and I'm so much curious, and like the idea of having a physical space that opens at a certain time every day and like needs to be presentable for people. And like, I actually don't have any Libra really in my chart either, anything that about aesthetics that makes things beautiful. And I was just like, oh man, like I could have, if I were advising anyone else, I would have been like, I don't know, this doesn't really seem like the thing that you do. And now the work I do is so Aquarius, right? It's like, podcast, Instagram, book. It's so much more like, so with so much in Aquarius, like I literally can just like wake up and I don't know what I'm going to do every day. It's very free form and it's better that way. But, when I was running the studio, it was like there at 7 a.m, there till 10 o'clock at night when you're cleaning up after the last class. And people need a schedule. They need to be told in advance, like, class you're offering. They need customer service responded to in a timely manner. They need someone to pick up the phone. And if I had thought through it a little bit more, I think even just paused for a week or two, I think I would have come to that conclusion. And so this time around, when I was trying again, I really wanted to build kind of quietly and just doing the things that I wanted to do without thinking about how they would be received. And originally with a podcast, it was me just talking about this experience of reset and sharing some of the lessons from it. And I had the podcast beforehand and it never really kind of picked up. And then as soon as I started I changed the format. So it used to be me and 2 of my friends, and then it was just me, and then it was 30 minutes, and I would just basically share an idea with kind of 3 contextual points around it, things that would just help people see situations in a different way. So every episode was, a little bite-sized piece of learning that was very structured, because that's kind of the way my brain works. And without doing anything, we got up to like 20,000 episode downloads, this was crazy because I'd had like 300 before. And so within a year, and then I went from like 8,000 Instagram followers to 100,000 within like a year as well, without doing anything really, posting twice a week. And so it all kind of happened super organically. And so it's funny. It's like the things that I was pushing so hard for to make Reset 1.0 work, nothing was working. And then the things I just kind of tried and put out there with Reset 2.0, some things stuck, some things didn't. But the things that did, it actually felt like there was a lot of ease behind them. And it's not to say that I didn't work hard, but I think I kind of went with the stuff that felt like it had traction and then followed that energy, the things I enjoyed doing. And so much about Reset 1.0 was about what can I build that is impressive enough to justify leaving this career that I've wanted for so long in venture capital. And that was just the wrong way of looking at things. I honestly should have taken like 3 months off and looked at my astrology chart and like met with a coach and just thought about it. It was so reactive.
Liz, we just shut down one of our pet projects, which was called Good For You, as a podcast that we ran for like a year and a half. And I mean, like, I don't want to speak for you, Wallace, but it was one of my favorite things that we did every single week. Cause like Wallace and I would just kind of shoot the shit and talk about things that we really liked. And it was so fun. And we, at the end of the day, we both kind of came to the conclusion that it didn't fit in with the holisticism universe, and it wasn't getting the traction that we needed it to get in order to continue to invest into it. So we had to sort of sunset it and give it a retirement party. And I'm just really resonating with what you're saying about sort of like the forcing, and then letting the things that just happen organically, that kind of bubble up, and that it's almost like the things that like go on an energetic wave that are like totally out of your hands. You don't necessarily know what's going to go viral and what people are going to really resonate with. You just kind of have to make things,
It's so true. And I think especially with like Instagram posts and, that whole universe. And I think you guys do a great job of talking about kind of the energy you put behind these things. But there's this draw to be like, well, people really liked this post I did before. Let me just try to do that again. And I actually try really not to look at the numbers. Obviously, like I see them because I have to, when I look and see how I posted, but I really just try to think, okay, what do I want to make right now? And then that way, at least I feel like it's a success no matter what, because I got to express myself in some way. And if it doesn't do well, that's okay. But imagine if I did all this work because I thought other people would like it, and then that it would be a success and it wasn't, then I would be doubly disappointed. And that's kind of what it was with Reset 1.0. It was like I was doing all this stuff that I didn't even enjoy. And so then because I thought it would be successful. And so when it failed, I didn't have either one of those things. And then when I was doing the other stuff, because in addition to the podcast and Instagram, there were other things too. I tried like online classes, different live classes and recorded classes, things that were fine, things that were just colossal failures, meditation things, blah, blah, blah. And, it was different because it was sort of coming from the heart. And so when it didn't work out, it didn't feel as crushing because at least I got to try it and then see some of that work recycled later on.
I'm resonating so much with that. And also your point about the no earth sign placements. And are you new to using astrology kind of in your approach to work? Or have you been doing it for years? And
I've been doing it for a really long time without telling anyone about it. I was, afraid people would judge me. But when I launched Reset, I picked the date using a business astrologer, Gerwick. I don't know if you've heard of her before, but she's kind of just these kooky. She does these like annual guides called Good Timing Guide. And she also does business consultations. So I did a consultation with her to choose a date to incorporate Reset, like actually submit send on the paperwork, and then also to choose the date of the PR event that launched Reset into the world. Like doors opened at a certain time, specifically on the dot. She was like, open the doors at 6:01. Don't let anyone in before that. But I use this thing that's a PDF download called the Good Timing Guide. And it tells you every day whether or not it's going to be a good day for doing stuff or not. Basically, there's like they put like a little green sign if it means that it's a day where people are generally in a good mood. So you might want to put sales and promotions out there. If there's like a dollar sign, it's a good time to sell things or put offers out into the world or, business development outreach. If there's like a timeout, which is when the moon is in void, it means like don't do anything. So I actually plan a lot of my stuff around that. And I used astrology to just knowing that the Jupiter was going to be in my first house. I set myself a deadline of when I was going to be reaching out to agents to submit my book proposal. And even before that, when I was working in venture capital, I would generally know when Mercury retrogrades or eclipses were happening and, when it felt good to write to people or not, or ask for help or, do a performance review. So I'm really into it. And even now when I'm coaching my clients, I won't tell them that it's astrology, but I might say, it feels like seasonally, this might be a good time for you to review, right? And reflect as opposed to moving things forward. What do you think? Do you feel that energy? Because I would say probably most of my clients don't believe in astrology, but they're probably experiencing it anyways.
Was it JP Morgan who said millionaires don't believe in astrology, but billionaires do?
That's a great quote.
Yeah. One of my astrologer friends, she has like a lot of conspiracy theories about different business titans who she thinks believe in astrology, because she'll be like, oh, obviously, I think, who was it? She's like, oh, obviously Steve Jobs believed in astrology because if you look at all of his iPhone or new technology announcements, they all synced up to blah, blah, blah. And so I think it's true. Like there are probably people out there who are looking more at the stars for timing than we think, because honestly, why not? Whether you believe it or not, I have never been led astray by it. So
my partner's fintech company, the CEO will never launch any new product, or they won't do anything in Mercury retrograde.
Yes.
They very much follow it. And it's kind of like a joke in the office, but not really, because everyone now believes. I think in the finance world, there's a lot of people who follow astrology because a lot of the graph and chart reading is so abstract. It's like you have to be a little witchy to be reading that stuff and interpreting the numbers.
Yeah, you're good at patterning,
I think.
Yeah, because astrology is really technical. I was coaching a client. We had some time left and she had a question and I was like, hey, do you want to look at your astrology chart? Just because I knew she is interested in this type of thing, even though she doesn't really know anything about astrology charts. And she's like, sure, I'd love to. And she's a MIT PhD, in computer science. And she really gravitated very naturally as I was explaining, the houses and the angles. And she asked really good questions. I was like, oh, clearly you have a good mind for this. If she wanted to, she could not be the CEO of her great company and be an astrologer. Picked it up so fast.
Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Oura Ring. Oura Ring is a health and wellness tracker that is chic, it is cool, and honestly, it makes me feel really good about myself. In my experience as a wellness obsessee for many, many years, most of the fitness trackers or wellness trackers that I've used actually made me feel unwell. And the Oura Ring doesn't do that, which I love. I started using my Oura Ring when I found out I was pregnant, and I literally felt like I was an alien living inside of a human body. I had no idea really how to establish a baseline for how I was doing on a day-to-day basis. My body was changing. I wasn't moving as much as I was used to. I couldn't exercise in the ways that I loved to. And I was super sick for the first 7 months of being pregnant. And having an Oura Ring just honestly gave me the baseline of how my sleep was, how I was recovering, and how much I was moving every single day. Made a really big difference in not only my mental health, but my physical health. I can't say enough great things about Oura Ring. In fact, I've bought them for many people in my life because I love them so, so much. And I'm elated that they're sponsoring this podcast for the next month. I have the plain circular gold band and I love it. It looks very chic. You can't even tell that it's a wellness tracker. It looks really cool. I like it a lot. And if you're anything like me, you're someone who trusts their body, trusts their intuition, but also loves information and, views intuition as information just as much as analytics, I think you'll really love the Oura Ring in your life. Not only is the actual hardware incredible, but the software is amazing. The app has built-in meditations, movement, mindfulness exercises. It's so supportive in helping round out your holistic health. So go check out auraring.com/holisticism. We haven't even talked about your incredible clients and the really we briefly brushed over the work that you do as an executive coach. And I know we only have a few minutes left with you, but I'm curious, what's the biggest piece of advice you find yourself giving people these days?
The biggest piece of overarching advice that I give is that you will not be the same person who you were 1 year ago. And that is all across the board. It's the way you use email. It's the way that you run a meeting. It's, your goals for yourself, what you believe your strengths and your weaknesses to be. And because all of my clients are running these companies that are changing so quickly, they never really get the footing of feeling like they're doing something really well for a long period of time. And I think that's one of the hard things about being a founder is, and I feel like you can really relate to this being a business owner, is that when you have a regular job, the better you get at that job, then the easier the job becomes because you know how to do it. And with being a founder, I call it the reverse incentive learning curve, where actually the better you get at your job, the harder your job becomes because you're just creating more complexity for yourself. And so with my clients, I really say, get used to it. It's going to always feel like the rug is getting pulled underneath you. And that's a good thing, because if you ever feel like you know exactly what's going on and you've done it, then your company isn't growing any longer and you're not solving new challenges, not pushing yourself. And so I'll really actively use that language to them, where I'll be like, okay, feels like we're moving into a new era. This was you 1.0. Now this is you 2.0 or 3.0, wherever we are. And so I do a lot of kind of reflecting about how they've grown, where I'll say, hey, let's pause. Let's think about how you would have handled this a year ago versus now, and get them to actively accept and acknowledge that they are these highly changeable creatures. And so this is actually what I'm writing my next book about. But my big thesis is that in this new world that we live in, IQ doesn't really matter. Of course, we have to clear some certain bar of intelligence, but what really matters is your ability to adapt and change, which I'm calling AQ. That's actually what matters. I read somewhere that it used to be that people would have 6 jobs over the course of their lifetime, and now it's projected that Gen Z will have 15 jobs across 5 industries. Wow. They're going to change industries multiple times. They're going to live in multiple houses, different cities. And I think it's that way for all of us. I don't I look at, the software I use on a day-to-day basis, the tools, the knowledge I use. I didn't know any of this stuff 2 years ago. And I feel like that you can say that at any juncture in time, where the things I'm using today, I didn't know any of it 2 years ago. And of course, knowledge compounds on itself, but the majority of it, you have to be pushing yourself to learn and be fresh again. And so that's the big advice I have, is like always be changing. And then kind of related to that is that because everything's always switching underneath you, you can't look for positive reinforcement and recognition from anyone except for yourself, because you're just going to waste too much time trying to chase it down from investors, from your co-founders, and even like, God forbid, your employees. You can't do that. You can't put them in a position where they have to help you feel good about your job and recognize you. And it needs to come from yourself. And so many of my clients are these type A overachievers who, a lot of them are very technical, like either they came up through computer science or other sciences, and they're used to being the best at everything, at being the golden child at their company or their school. And what I say is it all has to come from you, because you can't walk into fundraising pitches hoping for people to validate you, because honestly, if you're really being a trailblazer, then you're doing things that people don't understand, and it's your job to educate them.
Mic drop. I think the AQ is so interesting, and I also deeply resonate with that. We talk a lot about squiggly brain, nonlinear thinkers here, and I think that's one of the strengths of maybe being diagnosed with ADHD or other diagnoses, where it's this superpower in a way that you're constantly searching for new things to learn. You're usually insatiably curious and hopefully therefore adaptable. And I really love what you said, because I think it also normalizes shifting and evolving and changing and not needing to hold yourself to a standard that no longer makes sense for you, or that, to your point, is 1.0, it was you a year ago, because I think there's still so much of our society that really encourages a straight linear path.
Yeah. I love the squiggly brain thing, because I use a personality assessment called the Hogan with all my clients. And the number one scale I look for is this thing called prudence. And we're looking for a low prudence scale, rather low prudence score. And what that means is people who are high prudence, which is not good, is they're very diligent, very detail oriented, but almost to a fault where it gets in the way, where they're like, oh, well, it has to be done this way. We always do it this way. This is our process. Too rigid. Exactly. Rigid. And then low prudence is very much like, okay, let me build this from first principles. Let me actually see if I can tackle this problem from scratch. And I think that's the squiggly brain, is like, you're like, okay, I'm going to research and see models of how people have done this, but ultimately I'm kind of going to build my own way of doing that. And that's so important. And whenever I see them hiring people onto their teams, if they're people who are high prudence, it's really tough, because almost everything has to get built in your own way with your own fingerprints on it, when you're doing something different or doing something new.
This conversation in general just makes me think about education, which is top of mind for me, because I have a son and I've been researching, like, this sounds so crazy, why there are so many more geniuses in the past. There are like some pretty incredible articles written about how we used to educate, and that it was basically like aristocratic tutoring, and aristocratic tutoring was one-on-one tutoring time with sort of a Renaissance person who would like walk with you and teach you something as you were walking through the city or walking through a garden. And, after your tutoring is done, you would go to an apprenticeship and you would learn from someone who was a master by making mistakes and always having a beginner's mindset, and honestly, like being bad at a lot of things, being that perpetual student, and also following your curiosity, as opposed to sitting down and like, I don't know, having to learn algebra and run your times tables, whatever, learn the quadratic equation. And I just think that's so interesting. And I'm trying to figure out how I can model that for my kid, or like create that world for my kid, so that he also loves learning and so he can have that approach, because I really think that we need that in the world. Like, because careers are changing so quickly. Podcasting wasn't a job 10 years ago. Social media wasn't a job 10 years ago. And who knows what we'll be doing in 5 years, in 2 years. No one can say. I think that adaptability quotient, like you said, Liz, is going to be one of the most important tools that we can have in our arsenal.
Yeah, I think it's really sad that most kind of traditional schooling doesn't teach that kind of follow the path of what you're interested in, the kind of idea of like one-on-one tutoring where if the child says, I want to learn about Egypt today, then they'll say, okay, great, let's explore what the pyramids were like. But instead what you learn is you can't think for yourself. You have to learn what we were telling you, and you have to be the best at it. And my husband and I were talking about some of our friends who are on the path of thinking about, New York private schools and, this question of, well, if you can open the door for your kid, this is what some of them say, if you can open the door for your kid and you have the financial means to do it, why not set them up to, have success by sending them to the best schools possible, even if it costs, $60,000 a year starting from they're 6 years old. And it was so interesting because my husband said this very cool thing that I'd never thought of. And he was like, you know what? I feel like when you send kids to those types of schools, what you're doing is you're definitely shoring up their potential downside, right? There's only so far they could ever drop. They're going to, at very minimum, have a pretty average good life. They'll be able to get like a good enough job, right? They'll know enough people to be able to do that, have the right network. But what you're preventing them from doing is ever reaching the very, very top, which is what I think you're talking about, Michelle, like that genius level of not being able to get there because you teach them just how to be this really perfection-oriented, competitive lemming instead of thinking for themselves. And I don't have a kid yet, but that is so important to me because I just think about who I could have been. I mean, not to be like, I wish I were raised differently, because who I am now, I think it happened because of the path. But I don't know. I think it would have been cool to have a parent who was like, what do you think? Like, what are you interested in? What are your opinions? Are you doing that with is it fun to do that with your son?
Well, he's only 5 months old. But yes, I mean,
oh my God, congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah, it's really fun, and also I feel the same way, Liz. I constantly am like, what would my life have been like? What would I have been like if I was just allowed to follow what I was interested in? And I do think, to my parents' credit, that they allowed me to do that once I went to college, and kind of like once I got a very high GPA that allowed me to kind of get into any college I wanted to go to. And then they were like, okay, you can go be an artist. Like, we know that you're smart enough that you'll be fine. But I kind of wonder, like, what would it have been like if I had that trust from the earliest age? But again, I wouldn't change my upbringing and my education because it got me here. So something worked, but it is kind of like a little question mark,
I mean, these kids are going to change the world. I mean, they're all these little kids now, being raised by such conscious parents. And it's because we need them, right? Like, we have all these difficulties coming up in the next few decades, climate, geopolitical stuff, everything socioeconomically, racism, blah, blah, blah. We all know about it. And so I'm just so excited for this crop of children. Like, whenever I meet young children who have parents who are really intentional and really see them as individuals, they're just so cool. Like, even 3-year-olds, I'm just like, you're amazing. Like, you say the craziest stuff that is so true. It's amazing.
Yeah, you can see it in their eyes. Like, there's just this deep knowing. It's really cool. Have you read the book Spirit Babies?
I love Spirit Babies. Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's
kind
really
reminds me of that.
book. It's such a great book. Yeah. That's what, it's funny because I got pregnant when I was 17, and it was definitely not like a intentionally conceived child. It was with this 27-year-old waiter who worked at TGI Fridays. I was a hostess there when I was 17, and he was just a total dud. Like, he lived in this house with like 8 other dudes, and they had like a non-clean bathroom, and he was 27 years old and dating a 17-year-old who looked like she was 15. Anyway, so I had an abortion, and I, going through this process of trying to get pregnant, I keep thinking, oh, but like, people get pregnant all the time. Like, I got pregnant all the time. Why is this so much work? And something my acupuncturist said is, there's also something about, you can do anything in the world a certain way and it can work, but also you're trying to create something really intentionally. And so whether it's true or not, I find a lot of comfort in thinking that my child just knows the right time that he or she wants to come in.
Mm-hmm. I will upvote that. I think that is a very comforting idea and thought. And it's good practice for us. I think like I feel like it like gives us some grace, because it's a really like scary job, I think, to bring a person into this world and to raise them and guide them, you know? So I don't know. That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
And to your earlier point, you usually would never undo what's already happened. So it'll happen at the right time.
It's true. And I've been really happy. I look back and I'm like, you know what? It's good that it's unfolded this way for a lot of different reasons, just in my relationship with my husband. But yeah, I feel like life is just a series of, you know, letting go of expectations and then trying to figure out what's coming up.
Yeah.
Have either of you read this book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer? He's the person who wrote The Untethered Soul.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love
so
that
good.
book. I read The Surrender Experiment before The Untethered Soul, I think. That is a crazy story.
And the thing is, like, that's like all of our lives. So the quick, you know, synopsis is he talks about how it's like exactly the conversation we're having today of every time he did what he thought he was supposed to do, then it just didn't work. Like he was trying to be a professor in economics. And then he wound up being the guy who wrote that Untethered Soul, which is so weird, right? And having this like big piece of land in Florida where like Ram Dass and the Dalai Lama would come, but he like never wanted any of that. And then it's just about how once he started like surrendering, accepting the flow of his life, everything just kind of unfolded the way. But it's funny because now he's, you know, in his 70s, I think. And so it really tracks the entire course of his life, where at one point he became like the CEO of a software company that IPO'd.
Yeah, he was like a software engineer and he kept being like, I don't know how this happened. And then we sold the company for millions of dollars. No clue how that happened. But it's a really good read. It's a good reminder of that like stumbling forward. Stumbling is maybe sounds pejorative, but it's like leaning into the flow versus I always think of the proverb, don't push the river. And it's so simple to say, but so hard to live out all of the time. That's a great read though, and a great story of surrendering.
Yeah, I like it because, you know, most times when people have done things like sold a software company for lots and lots of money and then had a best-selling book, they're like, I knew it was going to turn out this way all along. I planned it out. It was all me. I'm so smart. I'm so talented. And he's just like, I'm just a guy who's just here. It's very cool. His vibe is like, I'm an idiot. I'm just doing things. And whether or not who knows what's true there, but I like his way of attributing success.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels more honest.
Totally.
And have you ever studied Alexander technique, Liz? You feel like someone who would know it.
Yes,
well.
I have.
Yeah. I love Alexander. It's the best. And I remember a teacher telling me that running is just falling forward and you happen to catch yourself at the right moment. And that's how you run. And that's how you walk in Alexander technique too. You're just catching yourself. And that feels like this, to me, I've been thinking about this whole conversation of like, right, we're just falling forward like all the time. And we happen to catch ourselves and trust ourselves. And that's what propels us forward. And all you can do is trust that you'll know the next step and that you'll take the next step. And that's all you have to worry about.
That is actually just tangibly very cool for me because when I run, I'm always like, am I doing this right? And so I think it's very comforting to be like, okay, I know how to do this. Like humans, I just need to fall and catch myself. And, you know, it's like so, you know, applicable to everything where you're like, when the answer is ambiguous, you know, there's no right way to do a specific thing, especially when you're running a business. You're like, okay, I don't actually really know the answer to that. And that's, I think, maybe ties back to the beginning of this conversation of how do you do things differently. And it's kind of just, you know, this is what I say to my clients. It's like unlearning that there's a right answer for something. And we've all been put in situations where you're given the pat on the back or the gold star for doing it the best. Like, what if there is no best? It's just the way that you need to do it.
Absolutely. There's a million possible different scenarios that you could go down. Who's to say one is actually better than the other? It's really about the best next step for you.
Definitely.
Wow. I wish we could talk forever, Liz.
Can we be friends? I have loved this. It really feels like I've known you both for a really long time. And thank you for making this so comfortable and asking such great questions. And I just felt like I was just hanging out with my favorite girlfriends who are super smart and super spiritual. And it's just been really nice because I've literally just been here with my dog in the Hamptons by myself for 4 days. So this has been really fun.
Oh, so nice. Oh, that sounds very, very
lots of
blissed out.
naps. Very nice. But thanks for having me. So fun. And can we just be friends?
Yes. But I want to know when does your book come out?
Yeah.
It's out in 3 months, July 25th, 2023, Amazing. Which is a Tuesday. And they gave me these choices for when it would come out. Originally, it was meant to come out in September, and I picked the perfect date astrologically. It has to come out on a Tuesday, so I had a few limited options. They sent me like basically 10 options from September through January. I picked the perfect date, and then they were like, hey, actually, we want your book to come out 2 months early. Ooh. When do you want it to come out? And I was like, obviously 8/8. It's a Tuesday. Lionsgate portal. Amazing. And they're like, sorry, it doesn't work for us. We already have another book coming out. No resources. And so now it's coming out on like an astrologically iffy day, but I think it's okay. I feel like the astrology of this book is like, basically it's kind of going to be a little bit of a sleeper where it's going to kind of gain traction as people read it and pass it on to a friend. But I'm excited because I think it's an overall good day, but the moon is in void at the beginning part of the day, and then it opens up later on.
Okay. That's not necessarily bad.
Well, we have your back, and so does the community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't. I'm going to go buy it on Amazon right now.
Because pre-orders are really helpful for the release.
Yes, they're very, very helpful. They track everything. My publisher even sent me an email after I sent out a newsletter that was like, hey, I wrote a book. And they were like, this is how many pre-orders you got from that newsletter. I was like, I didn't need to know that. Oh. But yeah, they really track it very closely to give them a sense for how hard to push the book. But I'm with Penguin House, and they're amazing. Like a dream come true.
Yeah. You have to sell 10,000 copies to get on the New York Times bestseller list, right?
Around that. So it really depends on the week that you're putting out. They actually don't use like a formula. So New York Times is the only one that they also throw in like artistic license as well to who they think they should be on the list. And so it's the hardest one to predict. Everyone else goes straight off of BookScan data to basically say, okay, these are the top ones. But New York Times is kind of like, okay, so, maybe we won't include this book because it's, sold a lot of copies for like X reason. And normally it's not on the list. And so their goal is to like actually curate, go off numbers, but also with their own curation. And so that's one of the reasons why my date was moved earlier, because the publisher is really excited about the book, and they think it has a better chance of making the bestseller list if it comes out in summer versus fall, because fall is basically jam-packed with fiction. It's like when all the big sensational memoirs, and then to make it on like New York Times, the kind of general nonfiction or the general how-to and miscellaneous, that's everything from self-help to cookbooks, and so it encapsulates a lot of books. And so they're sort of like, okay, it's like not as splashy of a time to come out, but we think you could pop better.
Wow. I didn't know that it was like a curated list. Oh,
yeah.
That's very New York Times. They're like,
so yeah,
that book's tacky. It's not, we're not going to put it on the list, So
it's hard to predict. I actually looked at the number of copies sold that week for all the New York Times bestsellers for the weeks that I thought my book was coming out. And it varies anywhere from like 4,000 copies to like 20 to beyond like above 20,000. So it really kind of just depends.
That's wild. And like 4,000, it's a lot, but it also doesn't seem like a lot. Like you have 100,000 followers on Instagram, like it's a lot, but also a little. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I think it's really doable. I actually have been trying to manifest it. So I made on Photoshop, I took a screenshot of the New York Times bestseller list, and then I photocopied or photoshopped my book in with my name. And so I've been having it on the front of my computer screen. I've just been looking at it all the time. Just being like,
I love that.
It was funny because at first I photoshopped myself into the number 3 slot because I was like, that feels really doable. And then my husband was like, why even do this if you're going to number 3? It's weird.
That's so good. You're like, let me just make sure there's no ego here. Okay. You're like, tone it down. Of course, of course the man comes in and is like, what are you talking about? Obviously number 1. And you're like, right.
What is that quote? May we all feel as confident as a mediocre white man.
I think about it daily. Where else can people connect with you in the meantime? And
you can find me at liz-tran.com. That's my website, and it'll link out to my newsletter and my Instagram and podcast, and sign up for the newsletter. It's been fun. I write one every month, and there's usually something attached to it. So this past month I did a little like career astrology guide based on the 2nd, 6th, and 10th houses. Obviously everyone looks at 10th house, but I feel like 2nd and 6th get overlooked sometimes when it comes to career stuff. So I just fleshed that out a little bit more. And yeah, like stay tuned. There will be fun book events that are happening on both coasts and in the UK as well, where the book is coming out too.
And your podcast, which is great.
I forgot.
Gotta shout it out. The 12th House is produced by yours truly, Wallace Miller Blanchard. Our theme music is made by Nathan McKay, and our wonderful editing is done by Softer Sound Studios, who you can find more information about in our show notes.